All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. See this? This is my boomstick!
So, Parth, what have you been eating?
Trent, my boy.
It's nice to see you.
My podcasting host, my brother.
Oh, okay.
Was that a bit much? Should I? Okay.
You could have stopped at podcasting host, friend,
Okay.
classmate. There are a lot of things we are, but just look at us, Parth, brothers.
I had some Lucky Charms. We were gonna record, and all I'd had was a glass of milk, some choco milk.
Short for chocolate milk.
Yeah, I shortened chocolate to choco,
Which is probably more letters and probably more
and
time.
more syllables.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it makes me cool or sound a little cool. But yeah. So we were gonna record, and I was like, I technically haven't eaten anything. I'm gonna take a handful of these delicious Lucky Charms.
Great, very professional. What's that alarm for, huh?
My laundry. So
Putting your laundry above the podcast.
all right.
It's interesting.
I was saying we could just edit that out. I could restart, but no, you want to make it part of the whole...
No, the fans deserve to know the truth. That just what you think of them.
Yeah, so I took a handful of delicious Lucky Charms, put those marshmallow and cereal bits and pieces into my mouth, crunched them on my way here, and Trent, punctual as usual, was 5 minutes away from actually joining. So yeah, what do you have?
Of times for you to make fun of my punctuality, I was only 5 minutes late today when my standard lateness is like upwards of 15 minutes. So much so that I had a friend in high school who kept a notes section in his phone called the Trent Tardiness Differential, where he would list the time that I said that I would come to the place and then the time that I actually arrived. Which is your favorite of the Lucky Charms? I know that the, like, tan bits, that the non-marshmallow parts, are essentially just Cheerios, but not honey.
Pretty much, yeah.
Not honey-coated.
I feel like they're sweeter, though, aren't they?
Probably because there's so much, like, excess sugar kicking around.
That
Would
could
you
be
ever
it.
eat those independently, or are the marshmallows the crux of that?
I mean, like, if I go to have Lucky Charms, I'm gonna want some marshmallow happening.
But you're not the unique type of crazy person to order the just marshmallows, like, box off Amazon?
No, because that sounds like madness and a cavity machine.
Yes, it does. I think you can only appreciate the beauty of the marshmallow in juxtaposition to the blandness of the Cheerio of it all.
Trent, you're a smart fellow, and I agree with everything that's been said. Now, you're making me curious as to what you've consumed.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this breaks any rules to the pod, but being it's past noon, it's not particularly socially acceptable.
Could it be?
I've eaten nothing.
Is this a first?
It's a first. Usually I'll jam something in my pie hole last second just to keep you busy.
Keep talking about your pie hole.
Yeah, but my pie hole's currently empty. It's I have big plans for what might come next, but the show is about what you've eaten in the past tense, not what you've got lined up.
It's true.
Not to get too off topic, but it's the 50th episode spectacular.
Should we just move right along, let the people hear what they want to hear?
Yeah, let's just put all the people who said that we wouldn't get to 50 episodes on blast. Fuck you guys. We did it.
Welcome back to Craft Services, our 50th episode spectacular.
We did it.
Go us.
Against all the odds, against all the adversity, the obstacles. 25. Well, how many interviews is it? Is it like
I think we've done 23. I think this is our 23rd.
And so I guess that means we have 27 discussions out there.
Something like that. Anyways, welcome back to Craft Services, where we talk about
The movies. This is our film podcast. Thanks for coming.
Each week we talk about a film and hopefully have a crew member of that film to talk with us about their experience working on the picture.
This week we spoke with
second unit director of our film for this week, Army of Darkness,
Doug Lefler. And Parth. It says here in my notes that he was a delightful man and very insightful. Is that correct?
This is one of my favorite interviews we've ever done.
I'd say partially because we're now only 1 degree of separation away.
From Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell.
Yes. And we found out that, to put it lightly, our boy, Doug Lefler, to some level, inspired Edgar Wright.
It's true. You get to hear quite a few interesting stories. You hear how he was fired by Sony Pictures while working on Spider-Man.
Yeah. Political movie Hollywood mayhem. There's some juicy anecdotes in this one, boys and girls at home.
He was Brad Bird's roommate. You know, the guy that directed some movies like The Incredibles, The Iron Giant.
What school did he go? It was the Cal Arts?
He was only in like their first year.
Yeah, no, let's go back to the part where he was roommates with Brad Bird. Because that's awesome. Brad Bird wasn't on our show, but his college roommate Doug Lefler was. And that's pretty cool, too.
Indeed. Well, we don't want to give too many of the bits away, and this is a long interview, so we are just gonna... Trent, do you want to just lead us right in?
Yeah, so, listen to the entirety of the episode, or else there will be consequences. If you turn us off early, Parth and I will know. What happens to you next... It's
in your hands.
I feel no need to comment on it, but it could be grisly and destructive, and it could have something to do with Parth and I coming to your house and destroying you. At the end of
Peter from Legal is here. Can you just get us in? I have to deal with him, all right?
Listen, yeah, we'll reveal what comes next at the end of the episode, so listen to it. Thanks. All right, goodbye. Enjoy. Thanks.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our interview with Doug Lefler. He's worked on such projects as Spider-Man, The Avengers, Godzilla vs. Kong, and was the second unit director for our film for today, Sam Raimi's Army of Darkness. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So just to start off, what was your relationship with film at a young age?
I was once in a restaurant in Auckland, New Zealand, with 2 other directors, and the subject came up, what was the film that inspired you to get into the movie industry? And one of the other directors said Citizen Kane, and the other one said Lawrence of Arabia. And I said 1 million years BC with Raquel Welch and stop motion by Ray Harryhausen. Went to see that film at a drive-in with my dad, and afterwards I said, Dad, how did they make those dinosaurs? And he said, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I had heard those words come out of his mouth. So I became obsessed with learning how they did that. And this was a long time ago. We didn't have the internet, and getting information like that was hard-earned. Mm-hmm. And so perhaps because of that, it was precious, and I wanted to maximize on it. So I had wanted to be Ray Harryhausen for quite a long time, and I did a lot of stop-motion animation when I was in high school. Somewhere in my mid-teens, I actually got to meet some stop-motion animators like Jim Danforth and David Allen, and this was in the pre-Star Wars days, and most of these guys were out of work. And I decided that I wanted to not focus on executing the visual effects or doing stop-motion animation myself, but on planning it out, and to work more in the area of story, because it seemed like most of the films of that time that failed more from bad story than they did from bad visual effects.
Mm-hmm. So we read that you went to California Institute of the Arts, and we were wondering how that came to be, and we also were wondering how you ended up at Disney from there.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting. It was an interesting turn of events. I was making films when I was a teenager, as I said. I had a group of people, friends in high school. We formed a production company called Paragon Productions. There were 5 of us originally, and it kind of got winnowed down to 4 of us. We had an opportunity to go to an art teachers convention at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim. And there were people from what was then called WED Enterprises that were giving discussions on theme park design. And I cornered John Hench, who is the vice president of WED, and told him that we were making films and persuaded him that we deserved to get a tour of WED. WED Enterprises now is called Disney Imagineering, but it was then and is now the division of Disney that designs the theme parks. So John Hench said, "We'll call my assistant on Monday. We'll set something up." So I did. We scheduled a tour. My friends and I drove down there. They gave us a tour of the model shop, which was really inspiring for a bunch of high school kids. And afterwards, John Hench's assistant was taking us back out to the parking lot. We said, "We brought our movies with us. We are 8mm films. Would you like to see them?" And he said, "Oh, I'd love to." Now, this guy had already given up an hour and a half of his day to us. Mm-hmm. He said, "But we don't have an 8mm projector." So that was a kind of a graceful way of getting out of it. Unfortunately, it didn't work because we had brought an 8mm projector with us. So he got stuck.
Good planning.
We set up the projector in the conference room. It was at a time when some of the show designers were leaving to go home, and some of them stopped to see what we were showing. These kids showing these 8mm films. Some of them had stop motion animation. What they lacked in budget, they made up for in ambition and I think creative storytelling. And one of those show designers was a guy named Exitencio, and he put a call to Walt Disney Pictures, to the animation department after that. And about a week later, my mom came to tell me that there was a man on the phone from Walt Disney who wanted to talk to me. At first I said, "You sure it's not one of my friends playing a joke on me?" And she said, "He sounds very serious." So I got on the phone with Ed Hansen. He said, "So why did you take your films to show to WED and you didn't come show them to us at Disney Animation?" I didn't know Ed at that time, and I wasn't familiar with his sometimes misplaced sense of humor. So I didn't really know how to respond to that, but I did get to know him later. So he invited us to come back. We went back. We showed our films to Disney. And some weeks later, we got all 4 of us separately got calls. Disney was setting up this new program at California Institute of the Arts. Walt Disney, after he first created Disneyland, he began to lose interest in animated films. He was just more interested in the theme park that was newer to him. And he felt like he had kind of done everything in animation he wanted to do. But the animated films continued to make money. And so some executive there realized that in order to keep that particular cash cow alive, they were going to need to get new talent. Mm-hmm. So they decided that they were going to fund this program at California Institute of the Arts. They were already giving money to CalArts for the thing, so they thought they should get something out of it. So they had funding. They had teachers that were all ex-Disney employees. What they needed was students. So they were looking for students. And so they reached out to people who had come to their attention. So I was invited to submit a portfolio. At that time, I had no intention of working in 2D animation, but I did obviously have an interest in animation from doing stop motion. And I loved art. I always drew. And most importantly, my life's ambition at that time was to someday work for a film studio. So when somebody from a film studio called, I said, "Sure, I'll send a portfolio in." So I did. I still wasn't thinking I was going to go, but then I got about a month later, Jack Cannon was the head of that program, called me up and said, "Well, we reviewed your portfolio. It wasn't the best portfolio we got, but it was pretty high up there. So we're going to give you a full scholarship."
Whoa, wow.
I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm going to college." So I went to California Institute of the Arts, and I was in the very first class they had there. It was kind of a famous class.
Yes, it was.
We've heard.
Vanity Fair did a story about our program, about our class. I think it was in March 2014 issue or something. In my career, I have been a screenwriter, a producer, a director, a storyboard artist, an illustrator, a sculptor, and many other things. But in my amongst my classmates, I consider myself an underachiever. I was in that program for 2 years, and at the end of the second year, my former roommate, who was this guy named Brad Bird, came and said, "You, John Musker, Jerry Reese, and I are wanted in the dean's office." And I said, "Are we in trouble?" Brad said, "I think they're going to offer us jobs at the studio." And I said, "Brad, you're crazy. They're going to offer John and Jerry jobs, but they're not going to offer you and I jobs." But Brad was right and I was wrong. And they offered us jobs. And so we were the first 4 people hired by Disney out of that program. So it was John Musker, Jerry Reese, John Musker, who's directed 7 animated features along with Ron Clements, like Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Hercules and Treasure Planet and Moana, Princess and the Frog. Jerry Reese did Brave Little Toaster and The Marrying Man. Brad, he's done a couple of films. You have to look him up.
He's some guy. I think he made it. So you mentioned being a storyboard artist, and you have a lot of credits in that regard. So we were wondering how you became involved with doing storyboards for movies.
I segued from animation when I got hired at Disney. But first of all, as I mentioned, my life's ambition was to someday work for a film studio. And so here I was, I had just turned 20 and I had fulfilled my life's ambition. So I realized that I had to retool my program. And I didn't want to remain a 2D animator for the same reasons I didn't want to become a 3D or a stop motion animator. I wanted to segue into the story department, which I eventually did after a couple of years. And I worked on story for Fox and the Hound and on Black Cauldron. But I also, eventually I felt like I needed to move out of animation, primarily because when you do story in animation, at least when I was doing it, we were doing one sequence at a time. So all I could do was a sequence. And I really felt like in order to grow, I needed to be able to have the responsibility of the entire structure of the whole story. And also, I just always wanted to work in live action. So I thought if I didn't leave, that would become my career, which would have been, a great career. I have lots of friends who stayed there and have become part of cinema history as a result of it. But I wanted to leave. And I thought at the time, since I was doing animation storyboards, that the best way for me to segue into live action was as a storyboard artist. To that end, I sought out a veteran live action storyboard artist who was working at the studio at the time, and I asked if I could come talk to him. He was a guy that had started his career working for Alfred Hitchcock and John Ford. And when I met him, he was doing, some guy. When I met him, he was doing Herbie Goes Bananas. And he joked that he had started his career at the top and had been working his way down ever since. And he said, if you want to do live action storyboards, I'll tell you whatever I can to help you out. But I have to warn you before you do that it's a dead end job. If you become a live action storyboard artist, it will not lead to anything. Now, it pays pretty well. And he said, and I've always worked, but you just can't do anything else. You'll be stuck doing this for the rest of your career. And when I left his office, I remember thinking, boy, I'm glad I talked to him before I made this horrible mistake. So when I left Disney, eventually, I was working as an illustrator and as a writer. Eventually, somebody offered me a job doing storyboards for a music video, for live action music video. And I thought, this may be a big mistake, but I really needed the money. And so I took it. And from the day I started doing that job professionally as a live action storyboard artist, my experience was entirely different than this veteran who had advised me. I found I was working directly with the director, the first project, the director and the DP. And I had a lot of input into the story, into the concept, into how things were being directed, how the film was being made, and what the story was going to be for it. And I don't think that in any way that the veteran storyboard artist who had advised me had lied to me. That was his truth. And just as film students now that are just entering the workplace, their truth is going to be different than mine. But my truth was different. And I think partially because I'd love to draw, and I've always drawn. I was always interested in storytelling and writing, and I've always written as well. So I was bringing skills to the table that not all storyboard artists had, perhaps, especially I was very serious about storytelling. I did a lot of studying of 3-act structure. I read everything. I read comic books and Shakespeare and Ibsen and Shaw. I read anything I thought could help me learn how to tell a story better. As a result of that, I had a lot of opportunities. Probably the most prominent among those opportunities was what happened when I started working with Sam Raimi on Army of Darkness. How was that for a segue?
That you gave it to us on a platter. Yeah, we were just about to ask you about how did that because we read that interview where you were told that storyboarding was a dead end job. So how did that ultimately transition into getting what I believe was your first second unit directing gig on Army of Darkness?
After that first job, storyboarding the music video was a music video for Chicago, Stay the Night, I believe. I did a lot of other storyboarding and really enjoyed it. And then I worked a couple times for a company called Introvision, which was a visual effects company that had this front projection system. So I understood how it worked just from wanting to be Ray Harryhausen when I was a kid and understanding how rear projection worked. So I had worked for Introvision a few times, and when they were beginning on Army of Darkness, they brought me in. They actually hired me to work with Sam. And what they told Sam and Sam's producer, Rob Tappert, was that Introvision could do anything. It was like the best technique for visual effects that existed, and it could do anything. And then what they told me is, don't draw anything we can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a strange situation because had I been hired by the producer and director, had I been hired by Sam to work on the film, probably the first thing I would have done was try to convince him he should go somewhere else to do the visual effects for this particular film. Now, front projection had its advantages at that time. There were things it could do, but it certainly couldn't do everything, nor can any visual effects technique. You need to pick the best one for each job. But I was hired by Introvision to work on this and to make it as good as possible. I got along with Sam Raimi well from day one. We had similar sense of humor and work ethic. And because I had such a strong interest in story, I often found myself restructuring parts of the film. Quite often it was a third act.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, just screenplays aren't really good at third acts for some reason, especially if it's an action or visual effects film. A lot of times very good writers kind of forget what they know about writing when they start writing action. So I had previously on a number of films helped them by reworking their third acts. And I did that with Sam on Army of Darkness because Sam, besides being the director, he was also the writer along with his brother, Ivan. And he recognized that there were some things that weren't working in the climax of the film, but he didn't know when he was going to have a chance to do a rewrite with the rigorous pre-production schedule they had. So I offered, based on the conversations that he and I had, to try to do just a rewrite in the storyboard stage. So I restructured it and I kept the stuff we both liked and tried to keep as many of the original lines of dialogue in, but I just restructured it so that we could kind of get inside the character's head more. So we knew what Ash was hoping would happen. And when I presented it to Sam, Sam said, this is great. This is exactly what it should be. And I feel like I need to give you a writing credit for what you've done.
Wow.
I said, well, first of all, I was shocked because actually I didn't disagree with him, but nobody had ever even recognized that that's what I was doing before.
Mm-hmm.
But I said that I thought that wasn't necessary. And he said, well, how about if I give you 3 days of second unit? And I said, that I'll take. And then that 3 days became 3 weeks, and I just became the second unit director. It's interesting that every directing job, that was the beginning of my directing career when I directed for about 15 years. And every directing job that I've had, someone has tried to take away from me at some point. And which it happened for the first time on Army of Darkness. And I didn't realize how much I wanted to do the job, how much I wanted to try directing until somebody tried to take the job away. And at that time I said, well, I can't remember if it was I believe it was a producer that came to me and said that he wasn't going to be able to give it to me. He knew Sam wanted to give it to me, but he was going to have to give it to either the stunt coordinator or the visual effects supervisor. And without thinking about what I was going to say beforehand, I said, that's a really stupid idea. And let me tell you why. And when I started that sentence, I didn't know what the why was, but I said, I have drawn every shot for this film. I know how every piece fits together better than anybody, with the possible exception of Sam Raimi himself. But probably I know it better than Sam because Sam has so many other concerns on his plate. I've only been focused on putting this story together and planning how all of these shots are going to work. I said, look, the visual effects are really important. The stunts are really important, but nothing's more important than the story. Mm-hmm. If I was the visual effects producer or the stunt coordinator, I would have said something else. But that's just what I said based on what I had to work with, and I got to keep my job.
As the second unit director, can you tell us which scenes you were tasked with shooting?
Bits and pieces of a lot of things. One of Sam's favorite stories to tell, though, was how when we were doing the climax of the film, he was up on the parapet of the castle that we built in Acton, California, shooting a close-up with Bruce Campbell. And he looked over the wall and he saw me doing second unit of the armies charging the castle. And I had guys on horsebacks and stunts and puppets of skeletons walking in the foreground and explosions and pyrotechnics. And he was looking at this huge shot that I was doing and this little shot that he was doing. And he was saying, what's wrong with this picture? How come Doug is having all the fun? I did a lot of stuff in the battle. I did stuff in kind of all over the film. I think the first stuff I shot was, I think, the giant fork going up Bruce Campbell's butt in the mill sequence. Once watching Shaun of the Dead with listening to the commentary to that. And there's a sequence in Shaun of the Dead where he's getting ready for work and they do this montage, like these little snap zooms.
Yeah. Yep.
And I was thinking, that's really cool. And when I was watching the film the second time with the commentary, they said our inspiration for this was the blacksmith scene from Army of Darkness, which was done with all these snap zooms. And I said, I was by myself, but I thought, wait a minute, I directed that.
Yeah.
And that has become partly considered Edgar Wright's style. So what does that say?
What I did, and I should be very specific, was at Sam's direction. I mean, I storyboarded it. He was the one that was very specific about how to do the snap zoom. So I was executing his vision. There's a lot of me in that movie. There's a lot of ideas that I presented, and as with all of the films I did with Sam in the future, I'm not sure I can remember which are which at this point, this many years later. But yeah, so the work I did was really spread throughout the film. Mostly it was stuff that didn't involve the main unit, but I think I did a couple of shots with Bruce there. Later, I would work with Bruce when I was a main unit director. I got to work with him a lot.
Was it intimidating to sort of your first, second unit directing job? You're dealing with so many extras and, pyrotechnics and all of that. Was that intimidating for you, or did you sort of fall into it pretty easily?
It was intimidating. It was a kind of thing like the night before I was going to do it for the first time, my wife and I had actually gone to see Thelma and Louise, which it was out in theaters at the time. Just as the film was starting, Thelma and Louise were driving off to begin their road trip. It occurred to me that the next day I was going to have to walk on set for the first time and pretend like I knew what I was doing. And that was the moment I started to feel nervous. When I was on set, not so much. I actually really found that I liked the pressure of being on set. And there's something quirky in my personality that when other people are stressed, I become very calm. And I just I thrived under those conditions, which was a surprise to me. And the other thing that was a surprise to me is I found I really liked working with actors. And I'm not an actor myself. I never have acted and never intend to act, but I found I really loved working with actors. I learned a lot very quickly. I think one of the first lessons I learned was when I was doing that shot of the fork going at Bruce's butt. We had an oversized fork that was mounted in front of the camera, and we were pushing it on the dolly towards the double. We didn't have a lot of length for the shot. It's very short in the film now. and then I had to slow down so we didn't run the camera off the tracks. And I remember afterwards, the DP was Bill Pope, said, why didn't you just run the camera off the tracks? And I said, well, because it would have shaken and it would have looked terrible. He said, yes, but we would have gotten 3 frames more of that shot because we're going to cut it when it jars anyways. We can't use it, but we can't use it when it slows down either. So just push it until just run it off the track, get as much footage out of it. And it was one of those moments like, of course I should have done that. And it got me moving down the path of thinking about directing from an editing standpoint. I learned that lesson well, and I found it was very useful when we'd be doing things like when we were intending to tie 2 different sets together by doing a whip pan from one to another, where I just whip pan off so that we were looking at the craft service table, because I knew that as soon as the image was blurred, we would be cutting. And I occasionally had DPs that said, if the camera's facing that way, I'm going to light that part of the set. I said, we don't have time. I promise you we're not going to use it. He said, I've been burned too many times. And I said, okay, you stand over there and hold a sign that says, don't use this, so that when the camera lands there, we're not going to use it. He said, but don't make me take the time to light that part of the set. I promise I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to use this part.
Just quick transition onto another Sam Raimi film that you were the second unit director on, 2002's Spider-Man. How did that come to pass?
Sam and I hadn't worked together for a couple of years, and I was actually asked by one of my best friends, Jeff Lynch, who, when I told you about the group of high school students that were making films together that all went to WED, Jeff Lynch was one of my classmates from Santa Barbara High, and he later became Sam Raimi's kind of head of story for a lot of his projects. And Jeff asked if I would come to help out on Spider-Man. And then, so I was storyboarding on that. And at some point, Sam just asked if I would do the second unit. And I was one of 5 people, I think. And Jeff Lynch was another one. But Jeff and I were the only 2 that got credit.
Were you doing mainly action stuff or just like...
Yeah, a lot of action stuff and a lot of inserts. I actually shot the first stuff with Spider-Man as Spider-Man once he has his fancy.
Really? That whole montage?
The montage, the armored car robbery, the robbery of the Korean deli, that whole montage, I did most of that.
That's iconic work.
There was a number of shots that I was told not. We shot in second unit a bunch of inserts for the scene where Peter Parker gets bitten by the spider. And we were shooting that at the Natural History Museum here in Los Angeles. And the producer had told me we absolutely couldn't shoot anything that wasn't boarded because the schedule was so tight. When I got there, I said, I realized there was a shot. I hadn't storyboarded that sequence, and I realized there was a shot missing that we had to get. So I went against my orders and I shot it. And it was just a plate. It was an upshot of like dropping down from the pillar, intended to have the spider coming at camera. Because I thought before the spider bites Peter, we're going to want to see it coming at us. And it wasn't planned. It wasn't in the boards. And that shot is the very first shot that I saw when I first saw the trailer for Spider-Man. And it's in, I think, every single trailer for that movie.
That's crazy to us because we are huge Spider-Man fans. But did you shoot any of the ending fight?
I don't believe that I did. The other thing that you should know, Spider-Man is the only film that I've ever been fired from.
Whoa. Is this a scandal or?
Yeah. I mean, it was at the time when it happened, I got called by Laura Ziskin and who was the producer, the first AD, everybody basically told me, you were getting fired because the studio is trying to control Sam. They can't fire Sam, so they shot the person standing next to him. They saw me as his, I guess, what I was told, the studio considered you as right-hand man, so that by firing you, they thought they could control Sam. I'm not sure why they thought that was even a good idea to control Sam. Sam was doing a great job. That's what I was told. But I also at the time thought, well, if I had done my job better, or if I even just had played the political game better, this wouldn't have happened. So somehow I wanted to own it and say, well, that was my responsibility. So I actually wasn't there when they shot the climax of the film.
I see.
How far along into production did they did
Oh,
did this occur?
obviously we had been shooting for some time because I'd shot I had shot a number of sequences already. Then when the film finally came out, I went to see it. I was because they said basically I was shooting action, that the action I was shooting wouldn't work. And I think one of the reasons they thought that is because Sam and I had this notion that we wanted to do things in longer takes. At that time, especially at Sony, it's like American filmmakers had just discovered Hong Kong movies, something that it's a territory I had been mining for a long time. If you look at the pilot episodes of Hercules or Xena, you can see the influence I had from Hong Kong cinema. Sony had just done Charlie's Angels, which was shot in very much a Hong Kong style with a lot of quick cutting. And Sam and I wanted to try to do something that was a little more balletic. My dog is hacking. We wanted to do things in longer shots. So we designed these sequences. But it's like with the armored truck robbery, it's done in very few shots. And because the idea is we wanted to really see Spider-Man be athletic. And it was the first time we were doing CGI human characters. I don't know that if the executives, when they saw the footage, they could figure out how it was going to fit together and how it was going to look when you put the CGI character into it. When I did finally go to see the film, I realized that they used everything that I shot. They didn't reshoot anything. And then I got really angry. Like I was willing to say, okay, I just didn't do my job correctly, but they used everything. I didn't reshoot a single sequence that I did. So then I got annoyed.
To take the conversation to perhaps a less sore subject, the last Sam Raimi movie that I really want to talk about because it's one of my favorite movies is The Quick and the Dead, and you did storyboards for that. And what was that like?
That was great. I storyboarded every single shot in that movie. Back in those days, most of the time I was the only storyboard artist on a film. But yes, I got to storyboard every single shot in that film, and I would have directed second unit on it, except at the same time they had offered me the opportunity to do main unit on one of the Hercules TV movies. So there were two jobs I didn't get to do. One was storyboard Braveheart, which had been offered to me, but I think I had a second unit directing job that I had to take instead. And then doing second unit and Quick and the Dead, because how fun would it have been to do a Western like that? I just would have loved it. But I had the opportunity to direct main unit at that time, so I had to take that. But that was great. And I've worked with Sam on other projects since then. I was just working with Sam on a picture that he is currently doing that I can't name, but you may probably know it already.
So about your work in storyboards, I know it's unheard of for one artist to be tasked with doing every shot of a film like you just described. So when you're doing every shot of a film, what level of detail are you using? And also like what was your chosen medium and how long would it take you to do one? And just all about your process.
The art of storyboarding is the art of saying as much as possible with as few lines as possible. Well, it is to me. My process is generally I do a rough version of the entire sequence before I do any finished drawing. 95% of the time, I don't get a chance to finish the drawings and make them look pretty because my roughs are clear enough that when I present them, they say, these are fine, these are very legible, move on to the next sequence. Previously, I worked just in felt pen because I wanted to draw boards that would survive reproduction. When I started out, we Xeroxed everything, photocopied everything. And if you did pencil shading on your storyboards, it would just go to shit by the time it was seen on set. And being seen on set was where it was important. We are not doing comic books. We're not doing finished works of art. The sketch is to determine what the shot's going to be. So having the clarity of the shot, the composition, the function of the shot, the movement of the camera within the shot, all the information that you need to convey to every department what's going to be in the shot so they can all do their job well. The most important part of storyboarding can be done without a lot of drawing experience. If you can do stick figures and draw arrows, that's 90% of the job. However, the anatomy and perspective and that stuff is what you need to know in order to get somebody to hire you in the first place, because they generally don't hire people if all they can draw is stick figures. But if you don't know, if you're not an artist and you're going to do a film, it's still worthwhile doing storyboards. You should see some of Steven Spielberg's sketches. I have one here somewhere that he drew when we were working on BFG, and he drew it in my sketchbook. They're like a child's drawing, but they're clear. You know what he wants.
So something that caught my eye while looking through your IMDb was one of your earliest credits was on The Black Cauldron as additional story contributions. And as I'm sure you know, The Black Cauldron has something of like a cursed release, because they said it was so crazy dark for a Disney film, and that it was thus heavily edited. And I was wondering if you saw or knew of the dark version hidden from the world.
Well, I'll tell you, the version that came out was not nearly as dark as the one we wanted to do. But I don't know if I would actually use the word dark. I would just say substantive. I was very excited when we had the opportunity to work on Black Cauldron. When I had the opportunity to work on Black Cauldron, I had read the Lloyd Alexander books when I was in high school, and I was a fan of them. And I felt like the material could have been a breakthrough film. Especially, you have to understand, at the time when I started at Disney was 1977. It was the year Star Wars came out. John Musker, Brad Bird, Jerry Reese, Daryl Van Sitters, and Harry Sabin and I all went to the Grauman's Chinese Theater the second weekend that Star Wars was out, and we watched it. It was a very exciting time to be starting your career in the film business, because you felt like the rules just changed. And it was the first time that wherever you went, people were talking about it on street corners and coffee shops. It was a phenomenon. But it also made us all feel like we've got to up our game. We've got to do something that can reach a bigger audience. So the notion that we could make an animated film that wasn't just for children was very prevalent in a lot of the younger people who were working at the studio, and a lot of our hearts and minds. And the source material seemed like it lent itself. So we really wanted to do a film that wasn't just a story about good versus evil, but about this kid that had aspirations, made mistakes, and redeemed himself. So there was a different version of the version that I was working on with a guy named Pete Young, was another story artist, and Vance Carey, an old timer, was working on it. A lot of people contributed to that. And even John Musker and Ron Clemens ended up joining the story department there before they started directing. And all of us together were working to try to make this a film with more substance to it. And I believe we were succeeding. And then some people came into power that were sort of in between, like the Wooly Reitherman era and the new Renaissance era, that just said, nope, this is a story of good versus evil, and it's God and the devil, and the good guys are just going to be nice, and the bad guys are going to be mean.
So not what you wanted.
Not
basically.
what we wanted at all. And in truth, that was another thing that facilitated my decision to leave Disney when I did. To move on, because I felt like it was going to be heartbreaking to watch that crumble. I saw the film when it was first released. I have not seen it since then, and I recently did an interview about that, talking about the history and the progress of Black Cauldron, and I feel like I should watch it again, and maybe I would judge it differently now. I also feel like the source material deserves a second look, and I hope that Disney will do another version of it. They were talking about doing a live action version, and I think it's worth doing. I think there is a better version of that story to be had, and a potential franchise to be had from the Lloyd Alexander source material.
So speaking of live action movies, you've also, in addition to being a storyboard artist, you've worked as head of story at the Third Floor. And we were wondering if you could sort of explain what your role is there, what exactly a head of story does, and just the work that you do on movies there.
Well, the Third Floor primarily does pre-visualization for movies, although they do a lot of other kinds of they do a lot of post-visualization as well now. So they just describe themselves as a visualization company. Previs is mostly considered computer animation, but in truth, anything that helps you visualize a film beforehand is pre-visualization. So the third floor, one of the things that makes it different than some other previous companies is that they consider storyboards to be part of the process, to be pre-visualization. And there are projects that we do through the third floor that are only done in storyboard. So I run that department, and so I manage other storyboard artists that are working on. Although for me, managing is just I hire good people and stay out of their way. That's my management style normally. But sometimes I will be leading a team of artists on other films. Being the lead artist, meaning generally what that means is they give me the sequences that have the most problems to try to solve. But also at the third floor, we have started this original content initiative. So I am also supervising the development of new material. So we started this startup inside the third floor called Story Attic, and you can actually see our work at storyattic.com. And what we're doing is we are creating a lot of short form content as digital comics now as a way of testing out material. My philosophy about creating original content is that you create a lot of content and that you don't just come up with an idea for a screenplay and spend 3 years of your life polishing it. I think it's important to learn how to polish work and make it as good as possible, but I think you're much better off if you do 10 projects a year rather than one project every 10 years. So the idea of what we're doing with Story Attic is we are creating a lot of content in an inexpensive form, and the stuff that works, we grow that. And so we'll go from doing digital comics to doing animatics and then eventually to doing full animation. The company has aspirations and is currently moving into finals animation now. By the way, and I should just put a plug in here, Story Attic features a digital comics format called Scroll-On, which I invented and patented.
Very cool.
So, as someone who doesn't know that much about previs, say when you did previs for the Avengers, like how developed are these visuals?
Very, yes. Yes. You know, we back in the 70s, in the pre-Spielberg Lucas era, directors needed to be generalists. They needed to know a little bit of everything and have good managerial skills to pull it all together. Spielberg and Lucas, when they came along, it ushered in the era of the fanboy directors. These were people that grew up on movies and were passionate about movies and had an encyclopedic knowledge of what had come before. And now I feel like we are in the area of that what I call compartmentalized filmmaking, where things are broken up into areas of complexity. But it is pretty amazing if you watch some of the third floor's reels. Yeah, I think that they're available on the third floor website. You can see how close the previs is followed by the filmmakers. A lot of times it is given directly to the second unit directors to execute. Now, when I say that, that's not to say that the main unit director doesn't have their hands all over it, because they are involved. They work with the previs company to plot the films out. But if you're working on something like a Marvel film, it is so complicated and there's so many moving parts and they're so expensive that they plan out the action scenes very carefully. And for that reason, many times when the previs is finalized by the director and the producers, it's executed in that manner. And then it's usually edited down later. But the whole idea of doing previs is that you throw out less because you're planning it more carefully up front.
So you just mentioned Steven Spielberg, and you previously mentioned the BFG, and I was just wondering, what's it like to make storyboards for Steven Spielberg?
And have him scribble in your notebook. Yeah.
That was great. I worked with Steven on 2 projects now. I did BFG and Ready Player One with him. And then also did a little bit of work on a project with he and Tom Hanks that they're doing for Apple TV, a World War II project. Yeah, I actually got to meet Tom Hanks for the first time and shake his hand a month before he was diagnosed with coronavirus. He was like the first celebrity. But Spielberg, yeah, I became really good friends with Rick Carter, who was a production designer on BFG. And Rick Carter had also been the production designer on Jurassic Park. And Jurassic Park previously was the only film that I actively pursued. I wanted to work on that. And I put together samples of my work and I mailed them to Rick Carter. And I got a very nice rejection letter from him. And then, so when I got to know Rick, when I was working with him on BFG, I told him this story. I think he was embarrassed that he didn't hire me. But I'll tell you, the most important thing I believe about working with people like Steven Spielberg, or really, from my standpoint, the secret to my success, such as it is, I never tried to figure out what Steven Spielberg wanted, no more than I try to figure out what Sam Raimi would want or a first-time director would want. My brain doesn't work that way. I always think what the story wants. That is my dictate. I always treat my job as if I work for the story. Now, if I'm told to do something that I think violates the story, then it becomes a drawing exercise to me. I'll do the best job I can with it, but I always feel my obligation is to say what I think will benefit the story. And I realized when we were on BFG that at some point I felt like I was the only person that was thinking that way. Everybody else was trying to second guess what he wanted. And I think that was doing Steven a disservice and would do any director that you're working for a disservice, because if it's an idea he could come up with himself, he'll come up with it himself. There were many times when I would preface ideas that I had by saying, can I tell you something that you may hate? And Steven would, every time I did that, he'd get this big grin on his face because he knew I was going to tell him something he hadn't thought of. And I'd say half of the time I did that, he said, I'm not going to do that, and here's why. And he had a reason for it, which I could accept and move on. The other half of the time, it became something that he thought, that's great. That is taking it in the direction it should go in. And he is enough of a visionary that he loves doing something that he hasn't done before. So I had a very good time working with him. I enjoyed a very good working relationship.
So just to bring up the one of the last few big movies that we're going to talk about here, you've worked on Godzilla King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. Kong, and we were just wondering, and I've seen a bunch of your storyboards, and some of them are just like completely what is in the movie, and I was wondering, what is there a difference in process when you're working on something as the budgets increase and as the amount of VFX houses working on it increases, or is it, as you say, just because you're working just with stories, it's just sort of the same process mostly?
Well, it's always important if you're going to be a storyboard artist, there are three aspects to the job. There's drawing, there's storytelling, and there's filmmaking, and you need to study all three of those things. So even though story is my main guiding light in all of this, you also need to know how to actually make films and what shots you can get, what shots you can't get. You have to temper everything with that. So the interesting thing about working on big budget films is that for some reason, the higher the budget, the more restrictions you have. The higher the budget the film, the more you hear, we can't afford that. And on lower budget films, everybody knows that there's not a lot of money. So I found licensors like, well, I have an idea. I don't know if we can do it. And the producers would usually say, well, tell us what it is and let us see if we can figure out a way to give it to you. They had to be clever. They wanted to be smart enough to come up with a way of making something look really good on a low budget. When you're on a big budget film, it's like everybody expects the budget to get out of control. So they're just saying no right away to things. So
keeping the reins on the big ship.
Yeah. But here's another important secret. If the story works, it'll be less expensive to make and it'll be better. When the story doesn't work, you start throwing things at it that cost a lot of money to try to distract people. If you can tell a story that's the reason that is because if the story works, you're usually telling a story about what's going on with the character. And then so Godzilla destroying the city behind you is incidental to it, or it's part of it's part of the bigger picture, but the entertainment value is in the human story of the people that are in the middle of this this huge event. So the more you can keep it focused on story, the more cost effective the final product is going to be, the better it's going to be, and the easier it's going to be to film.
The last one of your early credits that I was curious about was The Lost Boys, and how you were a visual effects design consultant.
Am I? So you're telling me these credits that I have like that, and like on the Black Cauldron, I didn't remember that those were my credits. In those days of Lost Boys, I worked with a lot of visual effects companies, and one of them was a company called DreamQuest. I was working on Lost Boys with, I believe it was Eric Brevig and Hoyt Yateman, the two guys. Eric is still, actually both of those guys are friends of mine. They both have been directors in their own right. But yes, we were working on Lost Boys. I had, in the same way that I got hired on Army of Darkness through the visual effects company, Introvision, I got hired to work on Lost Boys through the visual effects company, specifically to draw sequences that had shots that they were going to have to create. So they brought me into the process to work with Eric Brevig and Joel Schumacher.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how was Joel Schumacher? Because he seems like he was an interesting guy.
He liked to make visual effects films without visual effects in them, if at all possible. I had very little interactions with him. If you remind me, though, I'll tell you, this would segue to a story about working on Total Recall, also with Eric Brevig. But on this, I do remember going to the set over at Warner Brothers when they were shooting Lost Boys and having these storyboards, and we were breaking for lunch, and Eric said to Joel, can you look at these? And he said, do I have to do it now? And Eric said, well, we're shooting this first up after lunch, so yeah, kind of you do. I said, okay, that was my memory of it. So we showed him the boards, and he approved them, and we went ahead. That was my interaction with him.
What was your time on Total Recall?
Total Recall was also brought in through DreamQuest, working with Eric Brevig, with the director, help me out, who the director that did Total Recall?
I don't know why I'm not remembering. Paul Verhoeven.
Paul Verhoeven, yes, thank you.
Of the RoboCop fame.
Of RoboCop fame, yes.
And Showgirls.
And I haven't seen Showgirls, but he also did Soldier of Orange, which is a great film. Yeah, so we went to show storyboards to Paul Verhoeven, and I can't remember what the boards were, but I just remember him looking at him and he going, yes, but you wouldn't do it that way, would you? And us going, how do we respond to that? No, of course you wouldn't do that way. These are the joke boards. Where are the real boards? Oh, we must have left them behind. We'll bring those tomorrow.
Well, Trent, do you think it's
time for the big kahuna final question?
Yeah, I think it's time.
So, what was the last great film you watched? And it can be a rewatch or a first-time viewing.
I have to say, I really did enjoy Shaun of the Dead. We spoke about that earlier. I was just surprised at what a touching romantic comedy it was with zombies. Mm-hmm. And then I'll also say I really loved second season and the first season of The Boys that I just watched. Yeah. I had actually worked on a presentation for a film version of that was going to be directed by Adam McKay. Adam McKay?
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah.
We did Talladega Nights. And,
The Big Short.
Yes. And Vice.
Yeah.
Yes, we were going to, he wanted to do this, and I read a bunch of the comics at that time, and I wasn't a big fan of the comics, but Sony said nobody would want to see an R-rated superhero movie. This was before Deadpool came out, so that was their call at that time. And one of the things that I guess one of the reasons I was so impressed by it is because I felt like the series really maximize the material. And I think that the series is better than the source material. And I don't say that about a lot of things, but I feel like they solved some of the main issues that I had with the source material. And I just finally got really engaged in it.
Yeah, those are great picks, and it doesn't hurt that you directly inspired one of them.
No, listen, I don't want to, but I do feel like I have a little piece of it. So I'll take that.
Well, Trent, do you want to close us out?
Yes, thank you so much to Doug Lefler for coming on our show. He's worked on such projects as Spider-Man, The Avengers, Godzilla vs. Kong, and was the second unit director for our film, Sam Raimi's Army of Darkness, as well as Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back after the interview. Wasn't that freaking dope? I really enjoyed myself.
That was awesome, faux shizzle.
All right, enough of the hip-hop talk.
That was a great interview, I'd say. Trent, no?
Yeah, no, it was freaking awesome. Thanks, Doug Lefler, for your time and effort. You're a really great man. You're a gentleman and a scholar.
If you go to our Instagram page, you'll be able to see Doug graciously showing a storyboard or a set of storyboards. He tried to show us some that he did for Steven Spielberg or some of Steven Spielberg's storyboards, but
yeah, he said
couldn't find it.
He said once while working with Steven Spielberg, I just feel that they need to use his full name because rarely do I have any stories with him as a character. Steven Spielberg did a little doodle of the shot composition he wanted, and Doug Lefler said that it was very simple, but and so we wanted to see it, but he couldn't find it in one of his many storyboard notebooks.
But if we ever get the chance to find it, you'll be the first people in the audience to see it.
Yeah,
if you go to our Instagram page.
If you go to our Instagram page, you'll see him, just a little screenshot, him holding up his beautiful storyboards, us there with our smiling little faces because we're so blessed with his company.
Presence.
And he said that he would email us when and if he found the Spielberg thing. When and if that day comes, we'll put it on our Instagram. So, in conclusion, follow us on all social media.
We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We are on Google+.
I've never heard of that, and I'm a co-host of the show. But we're, on Spotify.
We're not actually. Google+ does not exist anymore.
Cool. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, I have a list of demands here that Peter from Legal has laid out. And Parth, can you read them?
Yeah, sure. So they say you have to go to the iTunes Apple Podcasts section, find our show, Craft Services, type that in, get there, scroll all the way down. Then you're going to see a star rating system. You're going to give it a 5-star review. I'll let you give a 4.5 star.
Wait, all right. First of all, there's no half-star reviews on Apple Podcasts.
Okay, then you have to give a 5-star review.
We recently received our first 1-star review. And
did we really?
Yeah, it was all 5. We had 25 1-star reviews. Oh, no. Excuse me. We had 25 5-star reviews, and then we got our 26th, and it was a 1-star review. So shout out to that person. You suck. We hate you.
Trent, that might be Peter.
You went through all that effort just to say you don't like us? Just don't listen to our show. Come on.
Oh, Trent, we didn't even mention this in our opening, but the listeners don't know this because we are responsible adults releasing our episodes on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
But Trent and I we've not actually been on call with each other in about almost a month.
Yeah.
Is that true?
We recorded, Parth and I, the podcast lifestyle will wear you down. And during the month of June, Parth and I both needed to take a little vacation. So we got all of our episodes done beforehand, so we could not think about movies for like a month. Well, I guess we probably both watched several films during this time, but not having to discuss and analyze them was really kind of a blessing. With that being said,
but we are back.
Oh, I was gonna say, should we permanently, because destroy the show, being how much we enjoyed our time on.
I did enjoy not.
But maybe this is sort of a Lucky Charm situation where we wouldn't enjoy the time off. We wouldn't enjoy the marshmallows unless we had all that gross.
I guess that's true.
Cereal laying around.
Good way to bring it all back to the beginning.
Yeah, if you've listened to all hour of this episode, bless your soul, and you're the only person who gets that this full circle joke. What comes next? I don't even
Next week, we are going to be discussing Army of Darkness. It's just going to be Trent and I.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a good time, and then maybe the week after that, maybe something fun is coming.
Maybe. No, I don't know.
Maybe it's something we actually have no idea what we're doing, but we know we're doing an in-person recording. We still haven't decided on the topic, but maybe this is all planned out, actually.
Yeah, we said we wanted to be, quote, something fun and something that isn't a standard discussion. So maybe it'll be a ranking. Maybe it'll just be a round table conversation. Maybe Parth and I will fight shirtless, and you guys will just hear the audio from that. There'll just be a lot of meat slapping together.
Anyways, I think that's enough of that.
Yeah, no, but the 51st episode is basically as big of a deal as the 50th. So I guess come back next week if you want. But if you don't...
Well, now it's all the lead up to the 100th.
Yeah, dude.
This was all set up.
I feel like our next goal is so far away. Well, we won't... just on our current schedule, we won't get there for like a year. Like 50
Yeah,
weeks.
I think a little bit less, but yeah.
We'll be old men.
Yeah.
We'll be 21 years of age. We'll be clinking brews.
All right, I think it's
okay. Parth said, mention of alcohol on my family-friendly podcast? No, thank you.
not happening. Not
Parth,
happening. My parents listen to this.
We are rated explicit, which I like.
Yeah?
Because we can... Wait,
That's
Parth,
true.
say a bad word.
Frick!
All right, well, see you next week, listeners.
Bye, guys. Follow us on all social media. Love us. Please, we need the attention.
Shower us with love and affection.
Shower with us in general.
No one in a sane state of mind starts a pod, so clearly Parth and I aren't doing too hot, and we need your help.
Insane in the membrane. That's us. Insane in the brain. All right, that's enough of that.